Madam Mayor, we are live on YouTube and recording. You can begin whenever you wish. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Welcome everyone to our special council meeting for October 1st. Before we begin, just remind you, everybody, that the meeting, of course, is being recorded and live streamed to the Township's YouTube channel. And we do have participants who are joining us from both Zoom as well as in the chambers. So as is always the case, if you'd like to speak on a matter, please raise your hand and I'll call on you. So we'll now start with calling the roll. Deputy Mayor Nelson.
Present.
Councilor Watt.
Present.
Councilor Hort.
Present.
And Councilor Johnston has sent regrets. In terms of myself, Heather Watson, Mayor. In terms of staff, we have our clerk, Martina Chait-Hartwig. Good afternoon. Our interim CIO, Mike Brusher.
Good afternoon.
And our chief, Chuck Peterson.
Right?
And we have some guests here to introduce as well. I'm assuming they're coming in on Zoom, Madam Clerk?
They are, yes.
And letting them.
They're already here. They're just waiting until we get to the formalities.
Okay, great. Well, we'll introduce them later then. So of course, the reason for this special meeting is just to allow time for the presentation of the fire master plan and community risk assessment. We wanted to make sure that council had an opportunity to really digest the information. Moving along with the land acknowledgement, excuse me. We respectfully acknowledge that we are on the lands which are part of the 1818 Treaty 20 and traditional territory of the Anishinaabe bands of the Great Ojibwe Nation. We offer our gratitude to the Ojibwe for their care and knowledge of the land on which we work, live, and enjoy. May we honor and respect their teaching and our treaty obligations as we grow together. Now, the agenda, of course, was circulated prior to today's meeting. If there's any disclosure of pecuniary interests, this would be the time to declare that. Seeing nothing, could I please get a motion to adopt today's agenda? Deputy Mayor Nelson, Councilor Watt, all in favor, and that motion carries. Now it's all the introductions. Great stuff. So the presentation, we have with us Richard Boyes and Brian Durden. I believe we also have Stu Dawson joining us and Brad Bakery. And they are collectively from the Emergency Services Strategy and Solutions, Inc. Here to present our fire master plan and community risk assessment. Now, Chief, are you going to introduce us and set this up, or are we just heading this straight over to our esteemed expertise in the room?
Well, I don't want to take any thunder away from the presenters. So you've kind of done the introduction, and again, I guess there's two parts to this. One is the community risk assessment, which is a legislative requirement that was due, and it has been completed, just hasn't come to council because the same consultants are doing our master fire plan. So that's kind of the purpose of this, is to present both of them. We hired a third party to do that as both reviews, and this is their findings. We've obviously worked with them hand in hand, but this is their reports. I'll let them speak to it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Chief. So of the two of you I see on screen, who has the floor? Which one of you want to take it away?
We'll wait. Good afternoon, Mayor Watson and members of council. My name is Richard Boyes. I am president of Emergency Services Strategy and Solutions. I'm pleased to also have my associate Brian Durden attend. Brad and Sue will not be here today. Brian was the project lead, so we're going to co-present as we go through the master plan and the community risk assessment. Now, the one question is, did the clerk preload the presentation, or are you expecting us to share the screen?
No, Richard, I have added you and Brian as co-hosts, so you're able to share the document with all of us.
Okay.
If you wish, I can bring it up. But,
well, let me take an attempt at it. Every now and again, Zoom does actually like me and works. If not, we will do this. So to the mayor, first of all, it was a pleasure to work with Chief Pedersen. I've had the privilege of knowing the chief for a long time there. We were happy to be selected and be given the confidence to do the risk assessment and the master plan. I don't want to downplay the importance of the community risk assessment, which we'll get to, but presentation will primarily focus on the master fire plan, which is the action item going forward. So I'm going to take a, it says I've got no screen sharing here.
Richard, I can bring it up for you if you like.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you. So while we're waiting for it to come up, the first two slides, the cover slide is just the title part. The second one talks about the risk assessment and master plan, and that's just some verbiage. If you could go to the second slide, please. And again, it talks about the community and how you came about, and it was there at that point as to where we are. But more importantly, it's the second paragraph where the council, with the vision of going forward and wanting to ensure that you have a viable risk assessment and fire master plan. You know, it's a strategic initiative that you've taken on, and it's a proactive approach to ensuring that you provide the correct fire protection services for your residents. They are companion documents, so please don't ever let one think that the other one doesn't do. We want to make sure that the department is fully resourced to meet the current needs, and you know, you're also laying the groundwork for the future of the other inhabitants and the environment. Next slide, please. This was the project team. Brian, Sue, and Brad were all in the community and met with various members of council and the firefighters and other parties. Next slide, please. So we started always doing the community risk assessment along with the plan. We had virtual and in-person meetings. We met with mayor and council, CAO, fire chief, clerk, treasurer, fire department personnel were interviewed, and we looked at all aspects of your fire protection services, and we looked at your existing pressures, and future growth was analyzed. Next, please. Now, I don't want council to worry that there's a large number of recommendations here. You have 4 fire stations. Your equipment and apparatus is up to date. What is really came out with the study team is that you have highly motivated and dedicated people, which is always the backbone of a volunteer paid on call fire service. And they were very, very proud of being a Douro-Dummer firefighter and serving the community. And that came out in a number of the meetings, and Brian can touch on that as we go forward. But council should know that you have a very good group of people here that are dedicated to protecting the community. Next, please. So as we move through, I talked briefly before, they're companion documents. The CRA sets out the risk, the fire master plan addresses the risk. The master plan provides recommendations to improve service delivery. It's about moving forward and addressing the current and future needs of the township of Douro-Dummer. You should be looking at this annually, but more importantly for council to be aware of is that this is a living document. It can change, your priorities can change, other things can change. So please, as much as we want it to be a roadmap for the community, it's also not etched in stone. And of course, you have your fire chief who will help guide you through. Next, please. The foundation, I'm not going to read it all out, but there's the legislation that we work through and what the fire department works by. And as the chief talked about, the community risk assessment is OREG 37818. It was due to be completed by July 1st, and we were pleased to get that to you before the end of June. We'll talk about firefighter certification regulation as we go through the review. There's fire marshal's directives. There's always the Ministry of Labor, Health and Safety Act. There's the Section 20 guidance, Section 21 guidance notes. And of course, the Municipal Act, which gives the municipality power to be there, and your municipal bylaws. Next, please. So based on the previously mentioned criteria, we also looked at relevant standards. You hear the chief, you'll hear us talk about NFPA. It is a North American, actually worldwide accepted standard. Some are mandatory, many are not, and that's where the fire chief will guide you through in your future. The discussions about what is mandatory and what is not. But they're always thought of as industry best practices. The chief and the staff provided us with documentation, interviews, and the staff survey. And all that put together is how we came up with a risk assessment. Next, please. And the fire master plan. So we talked about the regulation 378-18. It identifies the risks in the community, and it is the basis of the fire master plan. Next, please. Now, the OFM, Office of the Fire Marshal, provided the templates. This has been the framework for the province of Ontario. You'll see them all there, the 9 of them: geographic, building, infrastructure, critical infrastructure, demographic, hazard profile, public safety response, community services, economic and past loss, and event history. Next, please. So we went through the review, and one of the things, without delving into it deep, is it came forward is the fact is that you have got, out of COVID, you've got a large number of, I'll say, seasonal residents that have now started to become more permanent. So that has changed your service delivery model a bit. You have a number of private roads that you need to deal with as well that somewhat or can be somewhat inaccessible. Those are two things that came up. I don't want to downplay the risks in the community. You have a lot of water that you protect, so that's always unique challenges again to the fire department. You have the businesses that you have the commercial, and you have other parts of that. You have the highways to deal with as well. So there's all of that is taken into consideration when we built the community risk assessment. That you have had the document now for your review, and Mayor, through you to the rest of council, if there's questions and you want to ask something, please just interject now, or you can hold it to the end. But if there's something, there's a question that council may have, just please speak up and we'll stop and answer it. After this, you'll be asked to approve the community risk assessment. You're supposed to review it yearly, so the chief will do that, and you need to do a complete overhaul of it every 5 years. In lots of cases, it doesn't change a lot unless you're experiences significant growth. But again, you take a look at it every year because something changes, and then every 5, you should go through it in depth a bit more. Brian, anything that we missed on the risk assessment?
No, I think that's good.
All right. Moving on, the next slide will start to talk about the master fire plan. There's 15 sections. You'll see there. We will go through this in some detail, and we will skip through it somewhat as well because there are 45 slides here, and I do want to ensure that council has time. I believe, Mayor, that we have a hard stop at 5 p.m. I believe. Is that correct?
That is correct. We have another meeting at 5.
Right, thank you. So we'll keep going, and if you feel we need to speed up, we can do that. I guess the question I'll ask you is, before we get into them, do you want us to read every recommendation, or do you want us to summarize the groups?
Certainly, council was supplied the report in advance of the meeting, so I assume that they've gone through and reviewed the recommendations. So I think the highlights would be sufficient.
Okay, thank you. That will be helpful. So we will kind of talk about these in groups. So you see the first 8 that are there. Next slide, please. The second 7. So that's the categories in the plan. Next, please. So as I said, the 56 recommendations, we grouped them into short-term, mid-term, and long-term. 1 to 3, 3 to 6, 6 to 10. It's addressed on the next slide, please. So again, these are our estimates, but council, I want to underscore that you can modify these timelines, and please don't think that if we've said something is short term and it takes you into midterm as fine, or it's long term and you have to bring it forward. Please don't hold these up as being etched in stone, because priorities change. Council has different projects come up that they may need to either accelerate or slow down. So this is our best best estimate based on our experience, based on interviews with the fire chief. But again, this is our timeline and is certainly subject to change, and it is council's prerogative to do that. And we put each timeline at the end. So moving forward, we will start into the introduction, and I will turn this over to Brian to take us through some of the sections.
Thank you, Richard. The introduction, essentially, there's one recommendation in the introduction, and it deals with the decision maker's guide from the Office of our Marshal's Office. It's Municipal Essentials Fire Protection Seminar, and it's basically a decision maker's guide that highlights the fundamentals of those that provide fire protection services. So it really is related to your roles and responsibilities as a municipality, the fire protection delivery options that are available to you. The OFM also has services that support fire services. Now, the good news about this seminar is it's now available in 3 formats, including in-person, live, virtual, or self-directed e-learning. So definitely well worth the taking the seminar in whatever format works for Douro-Dummer, because it'll highlight some roles and responsibilities of council and the chief. Next slide, please. In the administration section, there's a number of recommendations. One of the key ones we did when we analyzed the operations, how administration works, is the chief ultimately is a one-man band there. He does have a deputy who helps out, but the chief is very well. His workload is ever increasing, and this is a creation of the province by decentralizing numerous responsibilities down to the municipality, and this usually just falls on the chief. And Chief Pedersen is definitely bearing the brunt of the substantial workload. And one of our recommendations is to formalize the deputy in a part-time position, and which would be recommendation 2. But also in recommendation 3 is going forward after that formalization is review the workload and the hours and responsibilities annually to adjust the workload, because what we are finding in the province is the workload isn't getting lighter, and it's predicted to get heavier for chiefs across the province as the province of Ontario continues to download ever more, increasing workload to the municipalities, which falls on the chief's shoulders. Next slide, please.
Just one moment, Brian. I'll just interject for the mayor and council. Number 2 is probably one of the most important recommendations in this report, based on the workload that the chief bears. And a lot of what he does goes unseen, but it's there. And a lot of these recommendations will go through, just add to his workload, but it helps bring it around. So again, we believe that you need to ease into this role and adjust it accordingly. But when you add the suppression response capabilities, you add the fire prevention responsibilities, you add the training responsibilities, and the notwithstanding clauses that the chief never technically gets a day off. I know he's got some people to fill in, but he's always on call. So I just wanted to fill in. Sorry for that, Brian. Carry on.
No, that's fine. Next slide, please.
One more.
Number 4, yes. Sorry. The number 4 was essentially a health and safety committee being established. Currently, it's not a requirement, but what we found in our conversations and interviews with staff there is you have an administrative assistant firefighter who represents the workers, and currently, because she works so closely with the chief, whatever, she's perceived to be considered a management from a health and safety perspective. So by creating this health and safety committee with the rest of the firefighters, it would help alleviate perceptions and also give a structured platform to address health and safety amongst the firefighters. Next slide, please.
Excuse me,
Electronic.
Brian.
Yes.
Just a quick,
Sorry, question from Deputy Mayor Nelson.
thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Just a question on, on your recommendation about a part-time deputy chief. is that not kind of hard to fulfill on a part-time basis? For somebody to take that role and, without it being almost like a full-time position? Is that not a tough thing to fill when, if the person has another job and if we're not providing a wage or a full-time kind of position, it's gonna be a difficult task to fulfill that position, is it not?
Your Mayor, through to the councillor there, you're 100% correct. It is a challenge when we talk about part-time as a way to ease into it. There are some municipalities in Ontario that do this, but again, it requires a unique individual to do it, and it has to be a competent individual. So again, we would like to look at that, but the ultimate situation may be that it has to go to full-time hours. There's certainly the workload there. We're just trying not to shock council with the fact that there's more staff required. So obviously, if you can't find the part-time person, there are some places that still have part-time fire chiefs. It will be a challenge, though. The council is absolutely correct.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. And before we move on to recommendation 5, I do have a question on recommendation 4 on the Health and Safety Committee. So as an employer within the corporation, we already have a Health and Safety Committee. You're suggesting in the recommendation that a separate one be established specifically for the department?
What we're suggesting is there's representative, like right now, the department's representative is the admin assistant / firefighter, but because of her close relationship working with the chief, there's a perception that she's dealing with the management side of it. So potentially we're looking at representing someone from the firefighters, maybe whether it's captain or other group, and having that person be your representative from fire, short of we don't want to create more committees, but what we're recommending is that perception be overcome and not so much have it fall with the admin assistant firefighter that's currently there.
Understood. Thank you very much for the clarification.
Number 5, essentially, right now, Douro Fire has demonstrated commendable progress in capturing the data in FirePro. What this recommendation essentially is talking about is there is other potential opportunities to enhance efficiency between FirePro and other department and municipal softwares, and we're recommending that you look into whether they can be done seamlessly for more efficient, effective data capturing and transferring of data. Next slide, please. Establishing regulating bylaw, we're recommending it's being reviewed in the short term and also long term. And this essentially comes down to it's a best practice to review your establishing regulating bylaw. Currently, it was reviewed in 2019. A lot of this you'll hear of Regulation 343/22, which is the certification. And there are short and midterm goals here because the certification is coming into play in 2026 and also in 2028. There's another section of it which also requires council and the fire chief to determine level of service based on those certifications. So this one is essential that right now you have a very comprehensive establishing regulating bylaw, but it's necessary that you look at it on a regular basis, specifically coming into the next short and midterm as you achieve certifications and different levels of certifications, which we'll talk a little bit more in the training section. The user fees essentially is look at reviewing it, try and create some user fees that have comparisons with your neighboring communities. With the whole goal is to move more towards a sustainable revenue to help offset the operating costs of fire. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just on that, on user fees, is there municipalities that are moving into a lot of user fees when it comes to fire services?
There certainly are a number of user fees out there. A lot of them are fire inspection based. Some are fees for services based on MTO rates, fees for cost recovery. So nobody is in essence charging for fire suppression services, but these are some of the side fees that are addressed, like if you're doing plans review, lawyers' letters, development charges, fees. Those are all things that can help offset. They're not huge sources of revenue, but they also can recoup your time that the chief and the administrative assistant spends on doing them.
Do we currently have many of them now? Maybe I should ask the chief. We currently have many of them now?
Sorry, through the mayor to deputy, we do review our service fees bylaw. We're not currently charging for inspections. Some of our partners in the county are. It's kind of a split. One side is trying to recover some costs, like they're suggesting. The other side is trying to make sure that it's not a barrier to be able to go and do that inspection on a proactive approach. So it's not an easy avenue, but it certainly needs to be addressed. And we do have our MTO rates for responses. We have a cost recovery for certain situations. But yeah, a lot of we do have for reports, you have that in there, but some of these pieces that we don't have, and we do try to look at our neighboring partners to see what they're doing and make suggestions and include it in the annual review.
Thanks for that.
Mayor, through to the councillor, to follow up on the chief's, most of the cases with fire inspection fees, they're for the third and subsequent visit. First ones are free, one follow-up, but when you run into the problem reviews, that's when the fees start to help bring compliance forward. So again, as the chief said, you're certainly not out to limit it, but there are always ones that the fire chief spends a lot of time on trying to get compliance. And then when you start invoicing, sometimes the property owner pays attention to the importance of the inspection. Back to you, Brian.
Next slide, please. These two recommendations are talking about the mutual aid or the county, Peterborough County mutual aid, and also the automatic gate agreements. And both of these recommendations, it's a good business practice to review them regularly to make sure that everything in the county, your appendices are up to date, as well as the agreements are working for yourself as well as your participating neighbors. Next slide, please. Again, this is reviewing different agreements that you have. You have the borderless protection agreement, auto aid agreement, and these are both intertwining. The borderless protection agreement is quite aged; it's 213. So we're asking that it be looking to have it recommended to be reviewed to make sure that it's still relevant and practical. And also number 11, it talks about including the references to the borderless protection in your automatic aid agreement. The last one is to deal with the province of Ontario and specifically the MNR, Ministry of Natural Resources. We have an agreement with them, and it talks about roles and responsibilities. And periodically, the government does change some of the appendices and the agreement or bits and pieces of it. So it's just a recommendation to review those appendices documents, and they usually are related to training-related issues that need to happen annually, which Douro is very well ahead of that game. They schedule that training in the spring all the time, but it's just recommending a review. Next slide, please. Policies and procedures. Essentially, policies and procedures, there has to be a distinction between policies, procedures, and guidelines. It's paramount for the organizational management. Policies basically set the overarching goals and values for your community, for your organization. Procedures are detailed instructions that have to be followed. Guidelines give specific direction for tasks, but are able to be deviated based on experience. So here we're recommending that the best practices move towards, right now you run on guidelines and it's not best practice, sorry, it escapes me what the terminology is, but we're recommending you move towards standard operating procedures followed up with guidelines to help you. And that's what recommendation 13 deals with. And the last one, 14, just deals with when guidelines are reviewed and approved, is just to ensure some documentation process that all firefighters have reviewed it, whether it's through electronic email review or through a training night. Next slide, please.
On the communications, this is where you start to see the reference now to NFPA standards. 1225 is the new communication standard for dispatch. We know you get your services from Peterborough, so you are bound by an agreement and a partnership that works through, and they do, you know, Peterborough will be working through here. So a number of these recommendations address issues, but also it's going to be contingent on the chief to work with Peterborough to establish things. So we look at the first two, you know, the tones, emergency traffic. 17 talks about guidelines, which Brian just talked about for procedures. All of this functions through, but you're also having to work with the city of Peterborough as to how they supply their dispatch services. So it really comes down to a working group. Like I said, the 1225 standards are midterm timelines on that. And again, it will work itself through. Next, please. We talk about operating procedures, call answering, event processing. We talk about the NG 911. It's coming rapidly on the province next year, so there needs to be some public education and, you know, what type of responses for the new EMS dispatching protocol. It's called MPDS that's coming out. It changes. So there's a lot of work evolving around communications, but it relies more on working with the communications group and the chief working with Peterborough. These are guidelines to work through to move forward. Next slide, please. And then you know, you're leading, the chief is leading guidelines on areas of reduced radio coverage. I know that's working. The Mayday events, you have communication struggles. You are not alone in the province where I live. We live on the US River. Cell phone coverage is spotty. So between radio coverage and cell phone coverage, there's a lot of challenges the chief faces, and these recommendations all tend to flow together. And I don't want to downplay the importance of it, because without effective communications, you have no fire response per se, because nobody knows what's going on. So these are all in place very quickly. Next slide, please. And to look at the options, and the chief is leading the group on the paging, the unreliable coverage, and again, there's the who's responding that the firefighters use, but that's cell phone based. So again, you struggle, and the chief is doing an admirable job of managing this situation where it is, but some parts you're at the mercy of the cell phone providers and coming up with the county radio system. So there's a lot of work to be done. I encourage you to keep the chief supported on this front and to constantly improve communications. And it is one of the more expensive things that you'll need to deal with, but it's also something that you cannot do in isolation. Next, please. Brian?
Data collection. These two recommendations as we get into data collection is basically looking at establishing key performance indicators as an essential tool across your department for tracking every part of the business activity of fire service. And that's all divisions. By doing that, establishing key performance indicators, you can then analyze different metrics, whether if you're talking suppression, it's the dispatch times, the turnout times, then road response times, to be able to understand and improve and look at how is there ways to improve the overall performance of each of the division. So by establishing that from administration through all your divisions, you can then create the indicator, collect the data, and as well as then analyze it to see how you're doing year over year. Next slide, please.
So on the public education, we've got this, and here's another reference back to the ENR bylaw about what the level of service that the municipality will provide for inspections. Right now, you have to do request and complaint. But again, what are you going to do about the rest of them, which goes back down that your inspection program in 28 aligns with the frequency guidelines because you have vulnerable occupancies. You've got a lot of vacationers in the area, hotels, lodges, resorts that need to be dealt with. And then you've also got the lightweight construction thing coming in place, which is recommendation 29, that the building official interacts with the fire chief for lightweight construction, which is a significant firefighter safety issue to do this. But this part here, when we talk about the workload on the chief, 27 and 28 have a significant workload as he moves forward. So on prevention, again, he's doing a good job, but this is where some part-time, full-time help would assist them to get through. And, you know, it's always much better to prevent a fire than to extinguish one. Next slide, please. Ryan?
Firefighter training, there's 3 recommendations on this slide that deal with training, and really the whole crux behind the firefighter training in Douro is doing very well to move towards the OREG 34322 deadline, which the first one is July 2026, and that's for certification of firefighters. So when it comes to training, it's just ensuring that your training program gets you where you need to be for the first benchmark. The second benchmark is specialty rescues, which is out in 2028. But it's important also that as the changes occur, you're establishing regulating bylaw reflect the change in the certification, or that you are meeting that certification in that specific discipline. And for instance, I'll use a specialty rescue. If you're using water rescue, then you must say what level of water rescue you're going to do, whether it's awareness, operations, or technical. So it's important that as the certifications are achieved or not achieved, the service, the ENR bylaw, it reflects the service that actually is being delivered to the citizens. Next slide, please. Firefighter, essentially, a lot of you rely heavily on volunteer firefighters, and one of the key things is communications. And not saying that you don't communicate with it, but one of the proactive measures you can do is meet frequently with the volunteers so that you understand their needs, their concerns, or wishes. One of the big changes in volunteer firefighters over the years is the pressures that are come from the home life now. There's more expectations, whether they're with more child organizations, or there's more working, though there's now 2 working people in the home. So understand their needs, concerns, and wishes, and may help to reduce and improve retention or people leaving for volunteers. The other one, number 34, is pretty much standard going forward for most fire departments, is try and look at what you can do to increase your diversity in your hiring of volunteers. Next slide, please. These 2 just talk about the recruit program, and one of the things that we've found not only in Douro but across the provinces is when a recruit comes in, there should be a roadmap binder that says day 1 you're here and day X you're here, and this is the program. So this just 35 just recommends that the established of a Bible, if you recruit Bible, tells that recruit how they're going to do, what they're going to do, and when they'll achieve the next levels. Next slide, please. These 2 talk about succession planning, and these 2 recommendations will help assist with continued education and preparing the Douro firefighters for succession planning within Douro, whether it's up the captain and station district level, or hopefully in the future you'll find there's interest in becoming deputy and in chief in Douro from within. So these two just deal with succession planning. Next slide, please. The 39 and 40 again continue with the succession planning, but more at the higher levels. And it's just understanding that the more you can plant the seeds and the education within your group, the better chance they'll have of moving forward and replacing people as they age out in the senior positions. Next slide, please.
So we talked about suppression, but just on the previous slides there, it's important that you start to get a succession planning, because sooner or later, the fire chief will decide that retirement is looming and you need to have a succession plan going forward. And I can tell you across the province, finding skilled people to be fire chiefs is becoming a larger and larger part. So any proactiveness in getting the internal members to work their way forward gives the township a chance to move forward. We talked about suppression, and there's a number of issues here. Now we talk about NFPA 1720. It's about staffing. Now 1720 does not put a timeline on response, but it talks about staffing, and you'll see in the report there was parts there about the number of firefighters it takes to effectively fight a fire. So it's important that you understand how that plays into it. We know that time and distance, it's a township, it's everywhere in Ontario, but when you get there, you have to have people. We'll get to that shortly. Again, you're very proactive on your automatic aid agreements. And again, keep looking at the data. You know, you also interact outside the area, and I'll say outside the county with other municipalities. So again, you have the borders agreement. It kind of rolls into automatic aid. There's mutual aid in there. But again, make sure that whatever you're doing with automatic aid, because that's all about staffing, gets you the people. We did do, which was not part of the review, but we would certainly recommend that you do a deeper dive into a response area mapping exercise. The chief was working on the 8-kilometer model, which is not wrong, but technology has moved on about using actual road networks and travel speeds, so you can start to figure out where it is, because you have some stations which we'll get to that need some work. But again, you should look at what's the travel times, where it is, but also the fact is you can find an ideal location for a station, but if there's nobody living around it, it's not really an ideal location. So it does have to fit together, but it certainly wouldn't hurt you as you go forward to do a detailed mapping exercise, because you may find some interesting overlaps, or more importantly, you'll find the gaps. Next slide, please. So we talked about this, and the chief will probably give me the look here, but when we talked about the required number of certified firefighters, because you have two classes of firefighters. You have your you have three. You have your certified, you have your grandfather, and you have what the province calls legacy firefighters. And certified firefighters are required to do aggressive interior structural firefighting. Now, the Office of the Fire Marshal talks about legacy firefighters being able to do a small fire, what they call incipient, small pot on the stove, but you need to make sure that you have written procedures, because the OFM is very adamant that you must have the guidelines. And this is the case where firefighters, being good-natured, will get themselves into trouble, that if they're not certified and qualified and get in, although the best of intentions are there, it's an issue. So you're working and you're very proactive on your certification going forward, but this is an important one that attention is paid to, that these policies, and clearly, and more importantly, to the chief, to ensure that the firefighters understand their role. There's nothing worse than telling a firefighter not to go in and do something when they want to, but this is one where you have the 3 levels of service. You're meeting the requirements of the act. You're working to certify, which is wonderful. But until you hit that magic number of legacy firefighters, and that means they're not at the certified firefighter level. That's the definition of legacy. So to do that, you know, Douro-Dummer continues to recertify the tanker shuttle. The chief did this while the review was ongoing. Excellent program. Kudos to him for doing this and to keep it there because that helps with the insurance ratings. We talk about the use of an aerial device. This always catches council's attention because they're big and they're expensive. But when we talked about the lightweight construction, all the homes are made with this. And unfortunately, it's a pretty dire situation on a single family dwelling to put a person on the roof now. And that's why you'll see more and more aerials coming into effect. It's all due to the lightweight construction and firefighter safety. So please do not think we talk about an aerial that over 5 stories. They're being used more and more every day for single family dwelling fires to keep the firefighters safe. Next.
Richard, I'll just pause you there for a moment. We're coming up on time. We've got about 10 minutes or so, 10 or 12 minutes left here, just to give you a sense of where we're at and things.
Very good, thank you. We're right there at the end. The facilities, next slide, please. Okay, I'll summarize the stations. You have some wants and needs. You had Greenview in to look at them. You're working your way through, you're doing a lot of things, but your stations need some work. From the health and safety point, the exhaust gas extraction. We've talked about PPE care and dryers. Next slide, please. The chief may or may not have applied for a fire service grant for some of these things coming up. Your bunker gear needs to be tested yearly. Decontamination goes back again to processes at the scene, but again, having the facilities within the fire station to properly clean bunker gear and shower and do the things. Exhaust gas extraction. Next, please. So the biggest need that we saw in a lot of this review is in your fire stations, which I don't think is a surprise to council, but it's there. Your fleet, great job. You know, it's up to date, it's there, you're buying new vehicles, keep your schedule. All we do is ask you to keep an eye on the pricing because it's outrageous as to how the cost has gone up. But council commendations and kudos to council for ensuring that the fleet is up to date. Next, the respiratory protection. Again, it's just having a program in. This is health and safety. It will be worked through. Next, please. Emergency management. You talked about that, alternative work arrangements. You test it every year as you go through. We didn't see a whole lot there. Work with your community partners to continue to do your roles and responsibilities. Again, not a lot of issues with that. Next, and we'll wrap this up, is we did not put pricing to this because nobody knew that the fire costs were going to go where they are. Priorities change. You know, the recommendations are based on needs and circumstances of the township and council's priorities in a budget year, your strategic plan and municipal growth. Next, please. And we talked at the start about being a living document. You know, the chief, here's where the work comes for the chief. He should do the implementation schedule and working with council as to how these recommendations will come in. This is not about dragging them to the ground with workload. This is about priorities and you be becoming a tick box to go through. And ultimately, it's council's responsibility to take the implementation schedule and move it forward. Next, please. So with this, you know, our recommendation is that council receives the 2 reports, you know, the internal review, the chief in consultation with the CEO prepares a report to address the feasibility recommendations, the implementation report, and it comes back to council, whether it's, you know, during the year or at the budget setting priority. Next slide. And that, Madam Mayor, brings us to the end of the part. We thank you for this opportunity. I know we've motored through a lot of things here very quickly, but you have looked at that. So I'll give you the last 9 minutes for questions.
Wonderful. Thank
you very much. Council, over to you. Councilor Watt, you go.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for the presentation and all the work you've done for us. That's quite a comprehensive thing to do for us and very, very much needed. And I apologize if there was part in there and I didn't see it because it is all in a short period of time. And we do have the documents here. But was there something in there, or should there be something in there for counseling for firefighters? You know, they go out and it's a bad accident or it's a devastating fire. And, you know, some people take that a little different than others. There may need to be some counseling needs afterwards.
Brian, no, there's not a recommendation about the mental wellness. There probably should have been, but it's been a proactive approach by the chief for a number of years, Brian.
Yeah.
Yeah, and echoing what Richard said is it's a growing part of the fire service, and there's different programs. Some of them are cost money, some are peer support. Every fire department had to do I'll call it PTSD plan and submit it to the ministry, and that was sort of the launch pad to move forward. We didn't hear a lot or very many issues regarding PTSD or that piece, so that's why there wasn't a recommendation. But it's always something, and Douro, the chief, is very proactive with it, so it's something to keep moving forward on. And there's always resources available, whether it's through the municipality, the county, or private.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Nothing at all. Chief, any closing remarks on this?
Sure, through the mayor, just one part there about from Councilor Watt. We 2024 we did add an EAP program for the firefighters that we've never had before. So that ties in a lot of the mental health supports, and there's a lot of tools and resources that they can access both online or phone call. With the PTSD policy that I think it was 7 years ago, it's hard to believe it was that long ago that we created that. We are talking about there's some things that are happening right now through the Ontario Association of Fire Chiefs in trying to revisit that and bring it up to date. And I think part of that is a better peer support program that ties kind of the PTSD policy in with our EAP program and to enhance that. So you should see that developing in the near future. And as far as just working with the organization, that it was a good opportunity to work with these guys. They have a lot of background with boots on the ground, being fire chiefs, and Richard being the past president of the OAFC. So I know some of them aren't here today, but they all have a fire background. So it was really, the meat and potatoes of the operations. They understand it. So it was really good to work with them. And so yeah, just kudos to the working relationship, as we spent a lot of time together, a lot of meetings and a lot of back and forth on developing what's before you. But so yeah, appreciate their crew.
Thank you for that. Other questions from council? Okay, so Richard, Brian, thank you both for your work and for your presentation. It looks like we've got where your work ends, our work begins. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but thank you for what you've done. Council, we're just going to be looking for a motion at this point to receive and approve the report that's before us today. Deputy Mayor Nelson, seconded by Councilor Vervoort, all in favor? And that motion carries. Thank you. So this concludes our special meeting. Of course, we do have a meeting starting at 5 o'clock in about 5 minutes. So we just need a motion to adjourn this, and our live stream and all those links will change for the 5 o'clock meeting. Again, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. A motion to adjourn. Councilor Vervoort, seconded by Councilor Watt, all in favor? And that motion carries.
Thank you very much.